Hello, I'm Esther Gitu-Yuat. It's Monday, September 12th. This is Africa 54.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth II lies in repose in Edinburgh, Scotland's capital. We'll have a report on events from VOA London. The Queen's death has stirred up memories and emotions about the emergence from colonialism by free African states. One Kenyan recollects. On Sunday, September 11, President Biden and the United States remembered the 2001 terror attacks that changed the nation. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
The body of the late British Queen Elizabeth is now in Edinburgh after arriving from Balmoral Castle, where she passed away Thursday. The Queen's coffin is expected to rest in St. Giles Cathedral for 24 hours to allow people to pay their respects. On Tuesday, her body will be flown to London, where on Wednesday it will begin a period of lying in state until early on Monday, September 19th, the day of the Queen's state funeral. Henry Ridgwell has more from London.
Leaving Balmoral, the beginning of Elizabeth's final journey to lay in peace. The convoy tracked slowly through the majestic Scottish landscape, where she spent her final peaceful weeks of life. In years past, the Queen was seen frequently in these remote Scottish villages, a royal neighbour who loved this region and who was well loved in return. Now residents gathered on the roadside to glimpse her for the last time and say goodbye. The shock is still raw. The silence was gently broken by ripples of applause.
We've known for all our lives, so it's been the one constant thing in the whole of our lives, the Queen.
After a 6-hour journey, the convoy crossed the Firth estuary and arrived in the Scottish capital, Edinburgh. Along the Royal Mile, thousands waited to see the cortege.
A very historic moment. Quite speechless, actually. She was a lovely lady. Great mother, grandmother, and she did well. Very proud of her.
I think it's just important to be here, just important to say goodbye. She's been on the throne for a long time. So, yeah, it means a lot. Sorry.
The coffin will lie in Edinburgh's St. Giles Cathedral, where the public will be invited to pay their respects. It will then be taken by plane to London Tuesday, first to Buckingham Palace, and then in a public procession led by Elizabeth's son, King Charles III, to the 11th century Westminster Hall, where the late Queen will lie in state. The hall will be open 23 hours a day for visitors and guarded by soldiers from the royal household. Tens of thousands of people are expected to travel to Westminster to pay their respects.
She has been an exemplary head of state in terms of her devotion to her people and to her job. And then I think the other thing to take away, which is inevitable in all these crowds and expression of emotion, is the enduring command that the British monarchy holds over the emotions of people in Britain.
The funeral is scheduled for Monday, September 19th at Westminster Abbey. The coffin will then be taken to Windsor for the committal service, where the Queen's husband, Prince Philip, was laid to rest. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
King Charles told Parliament Monday he is resolved faithfully to follow the example set by his mother, Queen Elizabeth. At a ceremony in Westminster Hall, the oldest building on the parliamentary estate, the King used his address to the upper and lower houses of Parliament to pay tribute to his mother and to pledge to uphold the principle of constitutional government. Also during the ceremony, the speakers of the House of Lords and House of Commons offered their sympathies to the new King.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, we gather today in remembrance of the remarkable span of the Queen's dedicated service to her nations and peoples. While very young, Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation.
King Charles also paid tribute to Parliament as the living and breathing instrument of British democracy. For more on the remembrance of Queen Elizabeth II, I'm joined live from the Parliament building in Edinburgh, Scotland, by Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther. Hello, Philip. Please describe to us the scene where you are.
Well, you can see behind me the gates leading to the Palace of Holyrood House. This is the official residence for the British monarchy here in Scotland, and it is from here that the casket carrying Queen Elizabeth II departed up the Royal Mile for that procession to St Giles's Cathedral, where the coffin is now and where Queen Elizabeth II now is resting, for people to be able to pay their final respects to her inside that cathedral here in the Scottish capital. Most of her children also spent the night here, with the very notable exception of King Charles III, who arrived here a few hours ago to then proceed behind the hearse carrying the coffin of Queen Elizabeth II up the Royal Mile and toward the cathedral. He is someone who people here have come to see. At the same time, they want to pay their last respects to the Queen. I spent a few hours with people here who were waiting a long time to see this procession pass, just for a few seconds. And it's a very good mood here in Edinburgh generally. You don't see all too many tears, but things get very serious and very somber when that hearse does drive by. It gives people the possibility to think back to, in most of their cases, their whole lifetimes, during which they only had one queen, one monarch here in the United Kingdom. It is also, though, a possibility for the people here of Edinburgh and of Scotland to welcome the new king. Should be a moment of celebration, at least in part. So you have a certain dichotomy here of feelings, if you will. And a lot of these events, of course, are happening here in Scotland early on during this mourning period, because Queen Elizabeth II died in Balmoral, her summer residence here in Scotland, and a place she loved so much, in a country she loved so much as well. And what we've seen here today has very much been a reciprocal feeling from the Scottish people who did come out here today to pay their final respects.
And Philip, do we know how long the Queen's casket will remain in Edinburgh?
Well, there's now a period that begins of 24 hours during which people can queue for a very long time outside of St Giles's Cathedral here to be able to see that casket. Not photograph it, by the way, just see it and pay their final respects. There will be a lot of people who will want to do that, despite the fact that pretty much everybody was somewhat prepared for the death of the Queen, simply because of her age, having passed now at the age of 96. There is still a bit of a feeling of shock here among the British people that they are now without the Queen that they have known for 70 years. And one way of saying goodbye is, of course, seeing that coffin in person. We will see those scenes that we will see here in Edinburgh over the next 24 hours, repeated somewhat in London as well, when Queen Elizabeth II will lie in state inside of the Houses of Parliament in Westminster. The state funeral, of course, will be taking place on Monday, and that will be the last possibility for people to see the coffin that will be carrying Queen Elizabeth II in the streets of London, just as we saw happen here today in the capital of Scotland.
Right. Philip, thank you so much. That was Associated Press correspondent Philip Crowther speaking with us from Edinburgh, Scotland. The death of Queen Elizabeth brings forth a range of emotions in the former British Empire about the monarchy and colonial legacy. In Kenya, a survivor of the Mau Mau rebellion crushed by Britain in the 1950s says he will never forget. Lucy Fielder reports.
As condolences pour in, there are mixed feelings in Kenya and among some other Africans about the late Queen Elizabeth and her country's colonial legacy. Britain once ruled more than half of Africa. Many have fond memories of its longest-serving monarch, who smiled and waved at crowds in 20 countries across the continent during her 70-year reign. But others remember colonial times, like the brutal 1950s crushing of Kenya's Mau Mau rebellion as the sun set on Britain's empire. 98-year-old Kenyan Gitu Wakahengeri was 17 when he joined the rebellion against British rule. He says he mourns Elizabeth as a human being, but won't forget being detained in a camp by British forces, beaten and denied food. They occupied my land, my birthright, he says.
I am not a believer of forgetting. Therefore, we will say, okay, you did what you did. You have said you have written an apology, a regret letter. If you want to apologize in the future, you can do so. But we will not forget, I personally will not forget that I was incarcerated for 7 years. I cannot forget I was put together with my father. I cannot forget I left my children for 7 years without food, without education. That I will never forget.
The tragic news reached Princess Elizabeth and her husband while in...
Elizabeth was on a visit to Kenya, aged 25, with her husband Philip, when she learned of the death of her father, King George IV, and her accession to the throne in 1952. She was to return many times to Africa as Queen. Kenyan cartoonist Patrick Gathara encouraged people not to forget Britain's colonial past.
There's a tendency by some to sort of say, well, the past is the past, just ignore it, it's a nice old lady who has passed. But I'm also encouraged by the fact that there's quite, especially online, quite a vocal a number of people who are refusing to be taken in by this, who are insisting that no, the history has to be told as it is. We've got to remember it as it is, and especially now, when all these tributes are flowing, when all the when the fundamentals of that history are being laid down, that we don't accept to be erased any longer, that our stories have to be included in there, the good along with the bad.
King Charles's accession to the throne has also stirred renewed calls from politicians and activists in former colonies in the Caribbean to remove the monarch as their head of state, and for Britain to pay reparations for slavery.
Lucy Field of Reuters filed that report. Here's more reaction from Queen Elizabeth's passing from Liberia and Nigeria.
Hi, my name is Nduke. I'm from Nigeria. I'm sending my condolences to the royal family in Great Britain over the demise of the Queen of England, Her Royal Majesty, Queen Elizabeth. I have followed her track record and I've perused the course of history to look at her antecedent, and I have found her to be one of the most inspiring leaders on earth. She was gracious in heart and actions, and she was very diplomatic. She has helped to foster development, peace and stability, not just in the UK, but in all over the world. I, as a Commonwealth citizen, found it being fit for me to send my condolences to the royal family in Great Britain. Please accept my condolences, and may the soul of our Queen Elizabeth, rest in honor. Thank you.
Let me firstly extend my sincere condolences to the royal family and to the people of the United Kingdom for the passing of Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Her Majesty the Queen brought the power of her presence, compassion, and position to some of the most vital humanitarian issues of our time. Words may not suffice to express the heartfelt sorrow that the entire globe feels for the passing of the Queen. Our prayers and thoughts are with the royal family in the UK at large during this difficult period. Truly, Her Royal Majesty the Queen was a great leader and will forever remain in our hearts. Rest in peace, Her Royal Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. This message is from Eric Jones of Liberia.
That was reaction on Queen Elizabeth's passing from Liberia and Nigeria. Now to Ethiopia, where the international community is urging the warring sides to seize the moment for peace after Tigray rebels said they are ready for talks led by the African Union. There has been a flurry of diplomatic efforts to push for negotiations after fighting flared in northern Ethiopia in late August for the first time in several months, shattering a humanitarian truce and cutting off aid deliveries to war-stricken Tigray. Tigrayan authorities say they are prepared to participate in a robust peace process under the auspices of the African Union after previously rejecting AU mediation and saying they wanted Kenya to lead any talks. The government has not formally commented on the Tigrayan stance, but has previously said it was ready for unconditional talks anytime, anywhere, brokered by the African Union. Let's move now to Mozambique, where the government is reeling under the weight of insurgency. Islamist militants with ties to ISIS terrorist group have killed thousands of people and forced many more to flee their homes. Human Rights Watch reports that on Thursday, an armed group linked to ISIS, locally known as Al-Shabaab or Mashababos, claimed responsibility for attacks on several villages north of the country. This latest attack happened just days before the European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Joseph Borrell's visit to the country. For more on the insurgency in Mozambique, I'm joined in the studio by Zenaida Machado, a Mozambique and Angola senior researcher in the Africa Division at Human Rights Watch. Zenaida, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much.
Well, first of all, you're a native of Mozambique. You're also working with the Human Rights Watch. First of all, let's find out and tell us what really hinders the Mozambique government from defeating the insurgents.
There are many things. One is their inability to cover the entire region. It's very clear that after the intervention of the Rwanda and SADC troops in northern Mozambique, this group has not been defeated. What they did was to change strategy. Instead of holding on to regions, they have now divided themselves into small cells that are going around areas that are not protected by security forces and causing more or less the same chaos that they were doing before. The second element is that the whole counterterrorism operations have been very much focused on fighting, and they seem to have relegated the side of humanitarian help. And because of that, it's still very easy for this group to continue to recruit, especially among young people that have nowhere else to go as they flee this conflict.
Do we know where these terrorist groups get their funding and where they train?
That's an information that we as Human Rights Watch don't have. But what we know is how they recruit. They're still recruiting among the Mozambicans. In fact, majority of the members of the group are Mozambicans and youth. And they have different ways of recruiting. One is through money. They promise people money that they don't have. And people who are unemployed and they've been seeking means of sustaining their families can easily be seduced to be part of the group. The other one is by kidnapping. We have reported before that they are kidnapping young people, young men as young as 10 years old to be part of the group. So they're recruiting a lot children. We have spoken to mothers that told us about their children being taken from them, and we have reports and evidence that those children were later transformed into child soldiers that are fighting against the government forces.
Mm-hmm. And now you talked about the in your report about the visit of the UN High Representative Josep Borrell. What does his visit mean for the security of Mozambique? What's the contribution of EU here?
Our understanding is that his visit and the contribution of the European Union at the moment is very much focused on the military intervention. And what we are calling for is for the European Union to also focus on the humanitarian side of this conflict. That means adding more money to help and assist the displaced people that have fled their areas. The second element is to ensure that women and children take at the focal point of any dialogue and community efforts to end this conflict. And the third one, which seems to have been neglected by everybody else, is accountability and justice. The European Union should use its influence to put pressure on the Mozambican government to investigate the abuses we have exposed over the years. It's been 5 years now that we have been reporting and exposing human rights abuse. Those abuses must be investigated, and those behind them must be taken to justice.
Zenaida, thank you so much. We hope there will be a solution to this crisis that has been ongoing in Mozambique. Zenaida Machado is a Mozambique and Angola senior researcher in the Africa division at Human Rights Watch. Tuesday on Africa 54, Lino Mudu has the latest health news, and still to come. Americans commemorate the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks. But first, Heidi Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we'll examine the mixed legacy of Queen Elizabeth in Africa. She was the longest-serving monarch in British history. Even though the British Empire dwindled, it left an indelible colonial imprint on the African continent. We'll look at what lies ahead for Britain's new King Charles III. Be sure to join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other African news, in a statement on Twitter, the United Nations mission in Mali says 3 UN peacekeepers were hurt Sunday when their vehicle struck an improvised explosive device in the country's north. South Africa's Eskom utility says it will reduce planned power cuts this week after sufficient progress was made in replenishing emergency generation reserves. And Uganda says it has made the first payment towards a $325 million bill it was ordered to pay by a UN court for invading eastern Congo during the Second Congo War. On the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks on the United States, Americans gathered to mark the date and mourn those lost. Marcus Harton has the story.
President Joe Biden laid a wreath Sunday at the Pentagon just outside Washington, where 184 people were killed when a hijacked jet hit the building. He acknowledged the grief experienced by families of those lost and pledged to keep the United States vigilant against future attacks.
No terrorist could touch the wellspring of American power, and it falls to us to keep it safe on behalf of all those we lost 21 years ago, on behalf of all those who have given their whole souls to the cause of this nation every day since. That's a job for all of us.
In New York City, Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, attended a ceremony at a memorial plaza where the World Trade Center Twin Towers once stood.
Jaime Concepcion. Albert Conde.
Families read aloud names of the victims, pausing for moments of silence at the time of day when airliners struck the two towers, claiming nearly 3,000 lives. Diane Massaroli's husband, Michael, worked on the 101st floor of the North Tower.
Oh, he was the best person ever, best dad, best father, best husband, hardworking, loved to bowl, just an awesome, that's why I go every year and I hold up his picture, even for people that never knew him, just to know him and remember his face, and because he was a life, that was worth something.
my cousin, Louis Joseph Naki II, Joey.
At the Flight 93 National Memorial in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, First Lady Jill Biden spoke, reflecting on the airline passengers who brought their hijacked plane down, thwarting an intended attack on Washington.
So as we stand on this sacred and scarred earth, a record of our collective grief and a monument to the memories that live on in us each day, this is the legacy we must carry forward. Hope that defies hate. Love that defies loss. And the ties that hold us together through it all.
Other communities around the country conducted observances, including candlelight vigils, interfaith services, and other commemorations. Marcus Harton, VOA News.
And that's our show this Monday. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.
That starts with demanding compliance by all NPT state parties, ensuring we have safeguards in place to monitor ourselves, strengthening the IEA's ability to implement those safeguards. We're encouraging states to adopt a comprehensive safeguards agreement and an additional protocol. If any NPT state party does pursue nuclear weapons, we have to act as one to bring them back into compliance. We also have to strengthen agreements preventing nuclear conflict, cap the growth of nuclear arsenals anywhere in the world. We continue to support the entry into force of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. We also stand ready to begin working with partners to restart negotiations this year on the long-delayed fissile material cutoff treaty. That has to remain the charge for each of us. To escape the logic of fear, live up to our responsibility to prevent nuclear conflict, to reduce nuclear weapons, to secure nuclear technologies, to advance peace and progress around the world.